Hey, it's Nolan, and welcome back for another Route 66 Suite related video. Today I'm going to invite you to come along with me to the ghost town of Selbytown, Illinois. Right now I'm in beautiful central Missouri at the Osage Arts Community. It's a beautiful day in mid-December, and I've been doing a lot of research on this town, so I've annotated some of these photos, edited some video, and so I hope you enjoy. Let's begin by acquainting ourselves with where Selbytown was located by looking at this 1945 map from the state of Illinois. It's about 12 miles north from downtown Springfield, a few miles north of Sherman, and a couple miles south of Williamsville. It's immediately northwest of Knollwood, which is a community, or a neighborhood of Sherman, really, that was developed in the late 60s after Selbytown became a ghost town. Here's a State Farm Rand McNally map from 1940 showing Selbytown as being 3 miles northeast of Sherman and 2 miles southwest of Williamsville, two towns that certainly show up in the Route 66 literature. Selbytown, however, does not. The question at this point is, what was in Selbytown between 1940 and 1945? We'll also consider that this time period would have been just under 20 years into Route 66's existence. I found a 1941 document from the Illinois Commerce Commission regarding a railroad crossing in Selbytown that referred to it as a village. Jack Rittenhouse's 1946 road guide to Route 66 says Williamsville has a garage in town but no gas station on the highway, and the next entry is Sherman. So it's quite possible that at that time it was a residential town with no highway services or restaurants. Let's take a look at this topographic map from 1940. You'll see Route 66 marked in red with a couple of buildings set back to the west a bit, four buildings by two sets of railroad tracks, and then a building on the east edge of town. Also nearby was the Locust Lane School to the southeast. I have read about Selbytown School, and I'm not sure if it was the same. The railroad track that curves through Selbytown was an interurban line, an electric train that ran from Peoria to Springfield in the first half of the century. It's interesting to note that Selbytown had a stop on this line. Aerial photography is another way to see what may have been in the town. The earliest I've seen is from 1946, so we'll start with the area immediately surrounding the center of Selbytown. The building on the west side of town appears to be at the end of a long driveway coming off of Route 66. Then, at the intersection of 66 and the main north-south road, there are trees and something with a driveway to 66. To the northeast, there are two or three buildings, also with access to 66. And the four buildings depicted in the center of town look like this, so not much there. In the upper right, there are some buildings by where the electric rail line curves there, and not much in the bottom left, and whatever this is. This used to be the center of town, which I'll show in a moment. And finally, on the east end of town is what presumably is a farmhouse. The next question is, what happened to Selbytown after 1946? Well, this topo from 1966 does not label Selbytown. The north-south street is gone, as is the electric train line. I believe the last train came through on that line in 1956. Only a few buildings remain, and around the mid-60s, Knollwood was beginning to be developed. I am curious about the north end of Selbytown, as there seemed to be some development. I'd like to know what this building is. Seems like a business of some sort. My third question is, what was Selbytown like before the 1940s? Was it always this small, or was it a thriving town that became a ghost town? So let's travel back to 1930 and look at this topographic map. As you can see, not much different than the 1941. So it was quite small even during the first 4 or 5 years of Route 66's existence. In researching Selbytown, I found many references to coal mining, so that seems to have been the primary industry here. For example, this report from 1927 lists Selbytown's mine as Mine Number 5. Notice another Route 66 ghost town on there, Green Ridge. I have a video about that place as well. This postal map from 1926 shows that Selbytown once had a post office, but it had closed by then. We have to be careful not to assume a town became a ghost town just because a post office closes. Selbytown's close proximity to Sherman and Williamsville may simply explain that. According to postalhistory.com, the post office was there from 1900 to 1912, so predating Route 66. Most references I found to Selbytown have been from the early 20th century, but before Route 66, such as birth dates. It's very possible those individuals stayed there until at least adulthood and into the Route 66 era. The big reveal in this video is this topographic map from 1907. It's clear that there were once way more structures here, especially by where earlier I called the center of town. Let's take a closer look at downtown Selbytown, if you will. There are about 20 buildings or so, all in close proximity to one another, and even a short east-west cross street. There is even a church depicted here on the main east-west road. And on the north side of town, another cluster of buildings along a cross street that ran from the main north-south road to the railroad tracks. It's also interesting to note that the two buildings at the far east and west ends of town depicted on this 1907 topo are also depicted on the 1930, 1940, and 1966 maps we looked at. Just yesterday, I annotated this 2018 satellite picture with the buildings and the roads depicted on that 1907 topographic map. I did the same using the 1930 map as well. To put this in context of Route 66, my next question is, how many of the buildings from 1907 were still in existence in 1926, the year 66 was officially designated? And of those, how many were torn down between 1926 and 1930? The next part of the video takes you into Selbytown. Earlier this fall, I stopped there on my way to Chicago and on my way back from Chicago. I took photos and videos and met a farmer who works on the property. He had never heard of the ghost town of Selbytown. He told me the pastor of his church owns this land, so I hope I can follow up with them in the future. For our modern-day tour of Selbytown, we'll start on the southwest end of town. Here's a pic of what quite possibly could be the same house depicted on that 1907 topo. The driveway came right off of Route 66, and back in 1907, it came off a road that became Route 66. One source showed Route 66 as being the northbound lanes of I-55, but when I looked at aerial photographs over the years, it sure looks like it's the southbound lanes. Next, we'll head to the north part of Selbytown. Most of this area, which once had several buildings, is under what is now a way station for trucks. The east-west road that once intersected the main north-south road stretched from the outer road that I'm parked on to the northbound lanes of I-55. Once Route 66 came through in 1926, perhaps the road and buildings were no more. I don't know. My camera is pointed east, and the roads are diagonal to us because they travel northeast. I've annotated this shot with the buildings depicted in the 1907 topo shown in red and that east-west road shown in green. The railroad tracks are still there, and they are by those trees. But by 1930, those buildings were probably gone, and Route 66 came through, shown here in green. Off to the north, there was a new east-west road, shown here in green, but that could have easily been just someone's driveway. We will rotate to the north, and there is a home right here, and we will continue rotating until we face northwest. So we're facing the site of the former north-south road that led into the center of Selbytown. It ran up the back of several properties along the edge of this cornfield right here. Here's a shot looking west, and I've drawn in that former north-south road in green. We'll rotate southwest, and off to the right you'll see that circa 1907 home. Marked in green here is Route 66 as it traveled through Selbytown alongside the two railroad tracks, marked here in yellow. This is drawn as if it were 1930. There are a couple buildings in the distance in the center of town, and two more to the left near the railroad tracks on the northeast side of town. Traveling back to 1907, the home is still there, as is the north-south road. I've also shown the pre-66 road in green, the railroad tracks in yellow, and a couple of buildings on the northeast side of town in red. The biggest difference between the Selbytown of 1907 and of 1930, of course, is the clump of 18 buildings in the center of town that used to be there. Again, I'm curious to know how many of these were still standing when Route 66 came through in 1926. And to reorient ourselves, we'll rotate back to the east and look at this northern part of Selbytown circa 1907 one more time. Because 66 is under the interstate, the best shot of the main part of Selbytown from this part of town is from this outer service road. So, for a tour of Selbytown, which is primarily over there, we're going to check it out by crossing the interstate and the railroad tracks. On the right, do you see the main north-south road that I've drawn in green? Let's use our imagination and pretend we are crossing the interstate and the railroad, heading south on that road, and we arrive in the main part of Selbytown with this view. We're at an intersection with an east-west road, and we've got several buildings in the vicinity, including a church a block to the south. But by 1930, we have a second railroad, and it crosses this north-south road here. Route 66 is just a bit to the right of us, and almost all of the buildings are gone. If we rotate to the southeast, we get a view of that short east-west road along which there were a few buildings. And by 1930, most of the buildings are gone, and we get the new railroad curving around here. Looking to the east, we see those 4 buildings from 1907, and again, by 1930, the railroad curves around here. Rotating to the east-northeast in 1907, we see a couple buildings in the northeast part of town, and by 1930, a couple buildings around which the new railroad goes around. This railroad, by the way, was the electric line that ran until 1956, and I wonder if the stop was here. Traveling from that old intersection to a location a bit to the southwest, we are now standing facing southwest on the former railroad tracks, a path which is currently being developed into a walking and biking trail. To the immediate right is the older set of railroad tracks, which is still in use, by the way, and to the right of that is Route 66, now the interstate. On the left is Farrand Road, and in 1930, it took a more angled turn just before entering Selbytown from the south. Looking to the west from here, we see both sets of railroad tracks, Route 66, and the old house. In 1907, the road turned to the house and we only had the one set of tracks. Next, we're going to look to the east from this location and look down the main east-west street. In 1930, there wasn't much, just a couple of buildings between the new railroad tracks and the road, and a building in the far east side of town. But in 1907, there was a whole line of buildings, 6 in a row on the north side of the road, and 2 on the right, including a church. Let's zoom into the intersection of those 2 main roads circa 1907. We'll zoom to the east and reach that intersection on ground level. Now we're facing north up the same road we were looking south before. I've drawn the approximate locations of the collections of buildings. And by 1930, we have the new railroad crossing this road and just a couple of buildings visible. Looking south at that intersection, you see the Route 66 suite vehicle parked by the 1907 building on that northwest corner. We zoom to the southeast corner and look at the site of a former building. Next to that building, according to that 1907 topo, was a church. This side of the road is all cornfields. Check this out. Across the street from the site of that church is this cross. And just to the east of it is this stable for horses and other animals. Notice the crosses that adorn this building. Here's that topo again, and we're going to zoom down the street to the east end of that string of buildings, and then turn around and face west. Here is an estimation of what Selbytown looked like in 1907 from the east. And this is 1930, with the new railroad and far fewer buildings. And lastly, we will zoom all the way to the far east end of town to the building that appeared on the 1907, 1930, and 1966 topos. Here is an aerial photo from 1964, and I suspect this to be a farmhouse. It's clear from aerial and satellite shots that the original building is no longer there, but there are newer structures on either side of it. When I visited this site in person, I ran into a farmer that was working there, and he told me that there used to be a farmhouse there decades ago. The structure on the east is a shed or a barn, and the structure on the west is a new home where a pastor lives. And at the site of the farmhouse is just dirt. And this is the best picture of the whole video. You will be in awe. To complete our tour of the Route 66 ghost town of Selbytown, we now zoom to the west from the shed to the site of the old farmhouse. Aw. Told you. Aw. Now that I know a little bit more about Selbytown, I plan to head back there in the spring, be in the space, get some inspiration for the Route 66 suite, particularly the 66 Ghost Towns movement, perhaps the 80 1926 movement as well, which will be the opening one. I plan to do some more research, see what else I can dig up on this town. If you're interested in this sort of thing, if you're a Route 66 enthusiast, be sure to subscribe to me at patreon.com/Route66Suite. You can join or cancel at any time. You can see all my previous posts that I've done, and it'll keep you updated on what I'm doing as I'm doing it. I routinely post, so check that out. If you're a conductor, however, I have a Facebook page as well as a website, and I have some information for you. So thanks for watching and joining me in Selbytown, Illinois, from Osage Arts Community. Have a good one.